So just to sort of start off at the very beginning,
Yeah.
where did you decide that you wanted to be a comedian? Were you funny at school, or?
Marginally. I was always a big fan of comedy as an enthusiast first, and for many years I was very keen to come to Cambridge itself because of the Footlights Review, obviously, and I was a big fan of Monty Python and Peter Cook and all those people that had come here, and I was always very keen on that idea, and I would talk to my teachers about it, and that I'd like to come to Cambridge so I could be in the Footlights, and my teachers were like, "No, you're not going to get into Cambridge, so just don't bother." And I'd say, "What do you mean?" They go, "Well, you need you'll need 3 A's at A level and stuff, and you're not going to get it." And I was, okay. So I never applied to Cambridge, and then I got 3 A's in my A level, and it was a real, it was a great frustration to me and a great annoyance, and I always felt like I missed out.
You spoke briefly about sort of John Cleese and Monty Python.
Yeah.
Do you sort of see them as your inspiration in comedy?
I was a big fan of John Cleese particularly, and Fawlty Towers and Monty Python, and before that, kind of old black and white comedy like Laurel and Hardy and Bob Hope, and then later people like Woody Allen. They would record things like Blackadder off TV and transcribe it to try and figure out how the jokes worked. I was like a comedy nerd. This is going to come as a shock to people, but I was something of a nerd in school.
I was always brought up with the understanding that we have our own sense of humour and they have their own sense of humour, and they don't really understand the British sense of humour.
Right.
Have you felt that you've had to adapt?
There is a different sense of humour, and it took me a while to realise that. I do think they are more generally optimistic than we are. There was a show when I was growing up that I was a big fan of called Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads, about 2 guys approaching middle age in the sort of north of England whose lives were sort of going nowhere. And this was a sitcom, this was a comedy show, a smash hit comedy show, and the opening theme tune, the lyrics were something like, "Oh, what happened to you? Whatever happened to me? What became of the people we used to be?" Like, it was that bleak. That was the opening credits of the show. And when you think of a show like, in America, like Friends, "I'll be there for you, shoot for the stars." And that, I think, is a big contrast between British humour and American humour. They are more optimistic. There is, I go back to Bristol, and people will say to me affectionately, "All right, you wanker? Steve, you lanky twat, good to see you." If you went to America and said that, "Hey, you fat douche," you'd never work again. If you see a bear or whatever in the woods, they're as scared as you. Are they actually? I'm not sure if bears are as scared as you. But like with bears, if you're confronted by a member of the opposite sex, make yourself look as big as possible. Roll on the ground, play dead. This is not working, this analogy. There's that fear, I think, when you're young, that, not everyone, but certain people, that you don't understand why you're desirable to the opposite sex. And that you sort of think somehow you're unworthy, or that you're too much in competition with other men or women. And then as you get older, you realize that almost everyone else is an asshole. And if you're not an asshole, you're already a step above everyone else. And that you just, that actually, if you speak to someone, they're not going to punch you in the face or run and tell everyone or laugh about you behind your back. Or if they, the man, it's almost too easy to dismiss him as a moron, because he's not, is he? He's somehow smarter than that. He has figured out what to say to appeal to some angry, terrified, paranoid mob, and he's pursuing it. I forget which one of the first presidents could speak about 8 languages. I'm not even sure that Sarah Palin can speak English. I'm not even sure she's seen a foreign film with subtitles. It's extraordinary. And so there is this sort of weird anti-intellectualism. There's this idea that because Trump's kind of shooting from the hip, that he's the man, right? Because he can take on Putin. To do what? To arm wrestle? It doesn't. It's scary. But I think we should rest assured that he probably will. Karl is that. Yes, he is like that. He is one of the most unique beings I've ever met. Well, I remember early on he said something like, "What were the things in that film Gremlins called?" Gremlins, Karl. And I remember we were talking once about how there were certain famous people that were only famous because their father was famous, like Bianca Gascoigne, Paul Gascoigne's daughter, or George Best's son, Callum Best. And Karl said, well, you could say the same about Jesus.
It has been an absolute pleasure.
Great. Thank you. Do I leave now?
We're just going to keep